So speaking of low budget and making a lot of money, here's something that did not make, well, it did make a lot of money. It didn't have a low budget. It was Empire Strikes Back, which is kind of really the big, huge, just massive Hoth-sized iceberg floating in 1980.
Yeah.
That actually came out. That came out a couple weeks after Friday the 13th. That came out on May 21st, 1980, and of course. Empire Strikes Back is the second Star Wars film. You might have heard of it.
Oh, I've heard.
Yeah, but I mean, what's
and the greatest
the
movie
one
ever
with
made.
William Shatner, right?
That's exactly it. Yes, no,
of
he
course.
did the score. John William Shatner. But no, it's kind of impressive to think about because like the first Star Wars, you know, there's all these amazing stories about how this is Lucas's crazy idea and he had to go from studio to studio and try to get the budget to make it. That came out and that just blew up. And Empire, it was really more Lucas assembling his dream team and getting to do everything he'd wanted to do with the first one and really getting carried away with that. He didn't direct it and he didn't write it. He got actually his USC professor Irvin Kershner. He got him to come and direct it. And Lucas was focusing more on running ILM and kind of businessman, production side of things. The script was put together by Lee Brackett, who was kind of famous sci-fi writer. She'd also written a bunch. She'd written Rio Bravo, done a lot of screenwriting, and unfortunately,
She was one of the
almost
leading female screenwriters of the day.
she's and she helped write one of the best sci-fi movies of all time. And unfortunately, she died in 1978.
Yeah.
And after she passed away, they brought on Lawrence Kasdan, who is still around. He's working on episode 7.
And he also wrote Raiders.
Yeah, exactly.
So
That's how
he's-
Lucas had been kind of introduced to him because he worked with Spielberg. Here's like the thing that I think is really fascinating here is that they really they had ideas from the first one that it wasn't so much that kind of that sequelitis where it's like, oh, we got to do something new this time. It's like we want to do something new,
Yeah.
And it's such a different movie. I mean, the whole setup of Empire, it's so gutsy how, it basically starts off and tells you right off the bat, if you haven't seen the first movie, you're screwed.
Yeah.
And it ends that same way. It basically says, if you're not going to watch the third movie, you're screwed.
But it's also, though, it does kind of throw back, like the original, but like serials. You had to have seen the previous chapter for this one to make sense. And it even ends on kind of a cliffhanger like the way serials did. It's also a far more adult movie.
Yeah.
I mean, more adult themes. I mean, just the fact that, Han Solo basically being put into, deep freeze. You're a kid, you watch that, you're kind of
horrifying,
transfixed.
yeah.
You're transfixed, though, by the, what the hell are they torturing him?
Yeah.
They freeze him alive.
And of course, the scenes with Darth Vader are very scary,
Luke
too.
gets his hand cut off. He's hung upside down with a creature.
Ghost Darth loses his head, and there's so much in there. I mean, the Empire literally strikes back in that movie, right? Like they are
walk up
ahead
with a
with
glove
every
and
move.
smack
It's
in the
like
face.
they drop down these amazing walkers. I mean, AT-ATs are just the coolest machines ever put in.
They're just
originally
it's
gonna have-
everything
So
a
cool.
little boy loves. It's space. It's fighting and basically giant dinosaurs.
So cool. And then like every other move, Darth is always ahead, right? Like he's in that meeting room on Bespin, and the doors open, and boom. Of course, it all worked out, causing pain to Luke's friends. Made Luke go there, and it's like it's such a different movie.
It also has one of the biggest kind of twist surprise endings in cinema history.
Yeah,
It's-
yeah.
What is it?
He's his dad.
Oh,
That's
okay.
it. But I mean, really, that might not be too much of a surprise because Vader means father in Swedish. That's what I'm.
Father?
That's what
Maybe, yeah.
It's kind of like
I don't
it's.
speak Swedish.
Yeah, I thought it was supposed to mean something like Dark Father or something.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't really hide it too much, but
Well, especially now if you watch episode 1, 2, and 3 before
yeah,
watching.
that gives it completely away.
But
Which
it was
is
kept secret from everybody,
a bummer.
including the cast, right up until the moment of filming. There was dummy lines and everything. I've been reading a lot about Empire. There's a great history of the Empire Strikes Back book that I recommend. But a lot of the planning for Empire was also about merchandising and about getting these, like Star Wars toys were so popular.
Yep.
And like for some reason, like a big part of the story of making Empire Strikes Back is like, we're gonna get to make more toys, and you can see with that like line of bounty hunters, and they needed something
It
like
works,
that.
dude.
Like
I had
the scene.
all of that
I had them
stuff.
all.
I mean, just I remember my dad was on a business trip, and I think it was in New York, and he called, and he told me that he had seen the new Star Wars movie.
Oh man.
And I'm like, you saw it without me? I'm like, he's like, don't worry, we're gonna go see it again. It's great. And like, but he's like, there's a big surprise, but I'm not gonna tell you. I'm like, okay. And then of course, you go and you see it. But
tell them, spoiler alert, that didn't exist.
yeah, that didn't exist
We didn't
then,
have that.
but they should have. But no, even on the level of toys, they started getting more elaborate. I mean, like just some of the Hoth stuff and you know there was also
huge.
and there's like tauntauns, and I think wasn't there like there was a little latch you could put the Luke or whatever action figure you wanted
jammed his legs in the hole there.
Yeah.
Same thing they did with the Dewbacks, actually.
Yeah.
There's a bacta tank you could fill with
There's
water.
also the cut belly on the Tauntaun. You can do all that kind of stuff. No, I had a ton
There
of
was
those.
C-3PO dismembered and in a bag on Chewbacca's back.
That's right. Little net, little
There's
black
so much
net.
dismemberment in that movie.
In all the
really-
movies.
There's
Specifically
a lot
Empire,
of
he really-
lost limbs in this.
Yeah,
that
you just
stuff.
had
What else are you going to
Baba
do with
in
a
the first
lightsaber,
one.
right? It's going to cut off limbs. That's
Yeah.
what
But
they're
also
for.
like all the minor characters that you remember, like Ugnaught or like Dak. You know, Bosk. I still love. He's a lizard in a flight suit. People,
That's
what's
right.
not
Yeah.
to love? IG-88, and of course, you know, Boba Fett being, you know, even though he was introduced.
So
That's a Jedi reference. Come on. But even, you know, that he was introduced in the holiday special, but like
Actually,
it was like the whole. Oh,
actually,
wow, what do you say?
Boba Fett. I'm reading a Star Wars book about the history of the costumes myself right now. He was first introduced in media form in the holiday special, but apparently the story was that they'd had all these live events, and they'd had people come out in costume, and they'd had Vader in like parades, and they'd had people, you know, at Mann's Chinese Theater at like, you know, premieres and stuff. And they really only had like one. They only had one big villain, so they kind of started working on Boba Fett. And at that time, Lucas wasn't really sure what he was doing with him in the script, apparently. And the thing that blows my mind is that they're not just. They don't have an email thread going. They don't have a Google Doc. They are working simultaneously in like LA and in Norway and in the UK and in the studio where they're shooting stuff. I don't know how they managed to make such a good movie scattered that far around. But Boba Fett was originally going to be sort of a super stormtrooper, like in early, you know, writing. He's
makes
called
sense,
like
yeah.
super trooper.
Mandalorian armor was like the super trooper.
Yeah, and he was. There's this early prototype photo of him where he's all white, and he looks very much like a clone trooper. You know, makes sense. Apparently, the helmet came from what was supposed to be an officer of the snowtroopers, and you kind of see the similarities.
the snowtroopers.
Yeah, the snowtroopers are awesome. I mean, all the costumes that are fabulous, but. They
the
wound up,
skirts.
they rolled Boba Fett into that holiday special, and then he became the kind of holy grail of toys with the missile launching backpack that never happened. But that was '79.
It also gave us Lando.
Yeah, Lando.
I love Lando.
What's one thing that I really like about the original trilogy, and Empire is the best example of this, is that it's kind of like it made video game worlds possible, where there's like an ice world, a jungle world, a desert world, a cloud world. Like that is Super Mario Brothers 3. Like the origin of like, oh, we have to make a setting for each of these different levels is like, for me, that's what I remember from watching these Star Wars movies for the first time.
Dagobah was so cool. Just the
they're like,
set
what are
of
we going
it.
to do now? Well, let's make an ice planet, but what else are we going to do? Well, we already did kind of like a Mayan temple jungle. What about a swamp?
But also, like, you know, Yoda helped, you know, kind of broaden the Star Wars cast of characters even more because, you know, okay, he was a puppet, and it was right at the height of like Muppets fame, and you had Frank Oz doing it, and they didn't know if it was going to work, you know, right up until they started shooting. And even, you know, okay, so you had Chewbacca, non-human character, but it's still a guy in a suit.
Yeah.
This is like, you've got to make people believe that this little Muppet, you're not breaking that reality, and it worked.
They nailed it.
Yeah.
Kind of following that too, we've seen like, you know, Dark Crystal and Labyrinth and, you know, Neverending Story and various kind of Jim Henson-ish things that really that have a lot of that kind of realistic quality, but Yoda was kind of the first one, and it's kind of scary to think.
And he had such an arc too that he has to start off as this buffoonish character and then make that switch,
and it's perfect.
and have gravitas.
Right?
You know,
The facial expression is perfect, and like I was saying, like the kind of the quivering ears
it's
really
acting.
sold
It's
it, right?
actual-
It's so
yeah.
A fun piece of trivia: the guy who sculpted the original kind of Yoda face. I don't have his
Stuart
name.
Freeborn, I think?
I believe so. Famous
think
kind
so.
of makeup artist.
Yeah.
He modeled Yoda after a combination of himself and Einstein because he wanted him to be wise.
totally looks like my grandma too. But that's okay.
But I love that they had Frank Oz underneath the floor, and he can't hear direction because he's under a floor, and he's, you know, doing wires and stuff like that, and wiggling things around. And then you've got Mark Hamill, who's up topside, and he's on a set with no other people. So it's kind of a precursor to what Lucas had people doing much later on when they're just, I'm talking to a green screen, there's no one else here.
Well, Kenny Baker is in the garbage can the whole
Exactly.
time.
Yeah. Unless I
But that
love
was an innovation that Frank Oz and Jim Henson made, is that they could go under the floor, and then people can interact with Muppets.
Yeah.
And it happens on the Muppet Show. It happens on Sesame Street. So at least there is somebody there, and you aren't talking to a green screen.
Yeah.
And man, it helps performances.
And
green screens must be so difficult.
They're much more human. All three of the first movies, just it feels the interactions are much more. I mean, they're much
There's
more
something
there.
organic,
Even though the dialogue is so stilted. I mean, none of the movies have great writing. Let's be honest. There's just something much more like physical and real about it. And, like
They built everything.
Yeah,
you know?
and watching the behind the scenes of constructing a set that has all this water and like
yeah.
bubbling
Yeah.
and smoking,
Dry ice for the steam.
dry ice stuff.
Now,
So cool.
speaking of building.